very much. I'm going to ask all the speakers to come up here and sit at the panel table so we can take some questions. I have a few if you are all too shy, but we prefer to receive questions from the audience. We'll collect some questions in the room. So don't be shy. Microphones. Go ahead. Yeah.
Hello. My name is Terry Duncan. I had Lynch syndrome. I had ovarian cancer about 19 years ago, and I had testing for, I think, the BCRA1 and is that what it's called? The BCRA2 genetic testing, and a very nice outcome. I did not have the test. I didn't have it, so I was happy, and I obviously survived, so that was good. I had all the treatment and a couple surgeries. And then my brother, about 7 years later, developed gastrointestinal stromal tumor. And he survived, he got at the age of 52, and he survived till he was 58. He had lots of his treatment, Levac or something, whatever, anyway. And then my mom passed away from a brain tumor when she was about 49 or 50. That was in 1975. My daughter, who's now a resident doctor, when she was in her first or second year of medical school, just over here, she said to me, Ma, I want you to go and get tested for this syndrome called Lynch. So I said, leave me alone. I don't want to bother. I'm fine. I feel good. Life is good. Leave me alone. Anyway, she didn't leave me alone. And I went and I got tested, and I have the 6. It's the 6?
Message 6.
Okay, so I don't live in fear. I really don't. Although I really didn't want to know I had that. So there must be some fear. My daughter's idea is you just want to pretend everything's great. Tonight, I didn't want to come tonight because I just didn't want to disrupt my nice life. And she made me go. So one of the reasons she made me go was she and my son. My daughter had myasthenia gravis as a teenager, and she also had she had surgery. She had it was an immune problem. She had her thymus gland removed, and also when she was about 12, she had very cystic ovaries, so had to have surgery too. She's okay. She did not have the Lynch test because she was just afraid of the outcome and insurance and the whole bit. Unfortunately, our GP because she started to apply for insurance, so that if she couldn't work, she couldn't practice medicine after at 65, got sick, that she could have some insurance. Unfortunately, our GP put my results on her medical record, and she was denied.
Let me ask Raymond, is there a recourse? Can you go back to the
Is there a recourse for that? Yeah.
That application is erroneous, so it's inaccurate.
It was, and also by mistake, our GP said that she actually had Lynch syndrome, and she's never been tested. So all this report is causing a huge problem. And
That's something you really need to take up with your GP, who obviously doesn't know your daughter's medical information.
she's known her most of her life.
Her genetic information. So if that's a bona fide medical mistake, then there needs to be recourse for that application because it's false. So that's saying that it would be the same thing as saying that she has diabetes when she doesn't have diabetes.
But you said that family history, they know the family history.
They may know the family
So then it's null and
history.
void.
It may be null and void, and if, so that's I don't know how to navigate through the insurance application, because every insurance application is the same, is different, sorry.
Okay.
So what I would argue, depending on the age of your daughter,
She's
I-
28.
I would encourage her to get the genetic testing, for her own health,
Yes,
irrespective of the insurance piece.
okay.
If she proves to be negative, she can, even though the family history is there, I would argue that she should put that voluntarily in her insurance application to nullify any family history that may be there. Your family history, they may ask, well, is your mother healthy? And then she would have to disclose, no, my mother had ovarian cancer, my grandmother had brain cancer. But if at the same time she's reporting that, she writes down, they have a genetic condition that I was tested for and I don't have it, then she's kind of off the hook for that family history. So I don't know how to navigate through that piece, and it would be between your daughter and her insurance company.
Can I have her call you?
Sure. She should see us, right? Like, we'll be happy to see her to talk about all of these things and whether or not she wants to proceed with genetic testing
Okay.
and not see genetic testing. So our door is open.
I just want to make a comment to that. MSH6 has a lesser cancer risk, and sometimes insurance companies look at that. So they might want to, she might want to mention that if she's reporting the fact that she's MSH6.
And specifically for her case, May also has insurance, so she might be able to get some recourse by talking to the Ontario Medical Association, because they offer some insurance as well, so they might be able to give her like sort of real deal.
Can I just have one quick. You talked about the immunotherapy. So she had myasthenia gravis, so therefore the T cells, her immune system, the good stuff was attacking, the bad stuff was attacking the good stuff. So if somebody has Lynch and they've had myasthenia gravis, that wouldn't work, then would it? You couldn't have immunotherapy.
And so the question is actually, these things are not related, it's two different things. The myasthenia gravis can be related, you said she had
A thymectomy, yeah.
thymoma probably.
Yeah.
So that type of tumor, although it's not really a bad tumor, can cause autoimmune diseases like myasthenia. So there's a lot of connections and diseases that we know about, and sometimes there are diseases which are actually worse than cancer that we don't talk about. But for the easy answer is, if you have a mismatch repair deficient tumor, if you're a Lynch, if you are just by chance got it, the immunotherapy has nothing to do with the story that your daughter just had. So I don't think these two things are related, so don't worry about it.
I think there's another question up there in front. Yes.
I was just gonna speak quickly to the insurance things and like your daughter. So my father has Lynch. I tested negative for Lynch, but the insurance company will not consider that as proof of me not being susceptible to his. So I was denied insurance related to his cancers, even though it has been proven that his are as a result of Lynch. So your daughter's kind of damned either way, meaning they're just going to look at your medical history and use that as indication of her susceptibility. That's might be my experience.
Well, I actually am an owner of an insurance brokerage, so, so I work with different insurance companies. I could never say to a client, don't fully disclose, so even if she doesn't tell them that you have it, if they find out, it's going to be the same thing either way, so you have to
have some preventative decision-making to do, and we haven't talked specifically about mutations and the variability of risk within the mutations. So, it is my understanding that we're kind of early days for that, but of course you can imagine that that's an important factor to consider, especially when you have to consider pretty aggressive measures to take. So that's number one. I'd like to know if there's any more data that you could speak to specific mutations and risk. And number two, we're fortunate enough here to have a great healthcare system, but what I am finding though is I've become a pincushion, because every time I tell somebody about Lynch, whether it be my GP or private healthcare, etc., they're very willing to do a cystoscopy, a this-oscopy, that oscopy, and that's lovely, but having said that, I think it's based on lack of knowledge. So I would love to be able to, every time I go to a professional, point them to some literature that is the most recent, pertinent literature that they can refer to make some decisions.
And this is going back to the gastroscopy thing. I think one thing that practitioners don't realize, and I treat mostly cancer, so I think I get a little bit a better sense of this, is that every test, no matter how medically safe it may be, is a ball of anxiety like that rubber band until you get the negative result. So if you have an upper endoscopy and I tell you that you have a 1% risk of having stomach cancer, you're gonna either wait till that negative pathology comes back, be in a very terrible place stress-wise for very minimal benefit. I think there are, to quote Dr. Tabori, some real news. Are the slides going to be available after Steve? So I mean, your genetic counselors can point you to the right directions. Those guidelines we talked about give pretty specific guidelines for doctors. So if you do have a new GP, you've been diagnosed with a Lynch mutation, you can give them those guidelines. They're pretty specific, and they tell you what is known and what's not known, and they give background if they want to read the background. So I think that's very important.
It's very hard to be a GP in 2017. If you put yourself in their shoes, knowledge is expanding, almost logarithmically, so it's hard to keep up and they deal with. This is rare. I mean, genetic syndromes are rare, but becoming more and more commonly diagnosed with all the genetic testing that's widespread. If you watch TV, you'll see a commercial on genetic testing to the general public. Counselors have to handle all that information. So you do have to be your own advocate. People make mistakes, and there's nothing wrong with what SAS says, having a discussion. It's not, a mistake is not necessarily a bad, the person's not bad in a mistake or they're not aware. You have to really work with your doctor nowadays.
A lot of the times, you will know more about your condition than your physician.
Yeah.
I face that a lot with hereditary cancer patients and hereditary disorders. They're rare. But, I believe our website has some accurate information. I also think that the letters that the counselors write to you and are copied to the family physician are fairly clear in what recommendations we recommend in terms of cystoscopy, no cystoscopy, prophylactic oophorectomy versus hysterectomy. And if it's been a while since you've seen us, it's always a good idea to get an update because those guidelines do change and are more refined. So connect with us again. And to your point about whether or not there are some genetic alterations that are lower risk and change the management based on your mutation, there are there are more penetrant genes or stronger genes like MLH1, and there's less penetrant genes like PMS2. At this time, I don't think we are recommending any change based on your mutation profile. There is some evidence in the literature that says that we can modify it at this point, but we need that high level of evidence to really make those changes, to relax the surveillance of 1 to 2 years for colonoscopy, et cetera. And I don't think we're there yet, and we wouldn't want to jump to relaxing anything in case somebody with a less penetrant mutation gets a cancer.
Let me ask Melissa, Lori, or Sarah, are you recommending aspirin to Lynch patients based on reasonable level on evidence? Are you?
We're telling them to talk to their family doctor, that there's some evidence showing it can reduce cancer risk. And if their doctor feels it's not good for everybody,
Yeah.
so if they feel they can handle it, then yes, we're recommending. Although the studies haven't been done on, low dose aspirin, it's been done on high dose. So, but at this point, we're recommending low dose of
And in children, you're not probably doing that, right?
So I just want to comment about these two things. In children, we are way behind with a lot of information that exists about Lynch because the biallelic syndrome is younger. Not because it's younger with the age of kids, it's we don't know enough. We don't have enough information. There is a discussion about preventative, but we cannot offer, for example, aspirin because the kids get brain tumors, and then they are on aspirin, they get a brain tumor, they may have a high chance of bleeding. So other things that Lynch people don't need to think about. I just want to say one thing which we always forget. So people who have cancer predisposition like us, we need to remember that we are the clients and we deserve and we need to take care of ourselves. If you go to the bank and the banker said something about your investment that doesn't make sense, you never go back home and say, okay, I trust him. But for the doctor, sometimes we don't care. So we need to take care of ourselves. Yes, you need to know everything about the surveillance protocol and don't just leave it to the GP. It's not fair for him, but it's actually not fair for you. Take care of yourself. And if you make intersections of big decisions, don't be afraid to ask experts, as you guys said. This is the time to go back and ask, go back to the team here that exists. Don't ask the inappropriate question. You go to the counter in the bank, you don't ask them investment questions. You go to a specialist, isn't it? So just make sure you take care of yourselves because nobody else will. If you do it right, you're going to be okay.
And to just copy that, I don't think you should be afraid to ask for a second opinion. No one is going to be hurt by that. I know a lot of people feel like, it betrays the respect that you have for your doctor or somehow it harms your doctor-patient relationship. I mean, I've had friends who have had cancer scares, and my opinion almost always is to get a second opinion. I want to go back to one point that you made. A lot of the things that we say or hear about risk is described in a black and white way. If you are Lynch, so I knew Teresa from before. She's reached out, and her group, My Gut Feeling, has done a great job in trying to raise awareness about a very rare cancer. And actually, they were targeted trying to get November to be officially recognized as Stomach Cancer Awareness Month, which it now is. So welcome to Stomach Cancer Awareness Month. I knew Teresa was speaking. I knew her story, and I still had to present the evidence that if you are in North America, the risk of you having stomach cancer in Lynch is rare, and that it's rare to have it under the age of 50. And knowing full well that there was someone sitting here who had gastric cancer at a young age in North America. So it's a long way of saying, anytime we talk about risk and that MSH2 is a higher risk, we make it sound like black and white. Like MSH2, your risk is 100, and if you're not MSH2, it's 0. A lot of the things that we describe or make it seem black and white, but the risks are very, very, very subtle. So, if there are papers that have been recently published that show there's ways of calculating your risk over time, but as Raymond said, we're not ready to say, you shouldn't have colorectal cancer screening every 2 to 3 years because they're a lower risk. So I think we have to, we as the people talking about the guidelines and giving you guys expert information have to be more subtle with how we explain things, and we have to tell you these things aren't black and white, that there's a lot of grays in literature.
And there's a whole psychology to having this information. I just want to introduce Tay Hart over there, who's actually a psychologist. And she actually does a lot of research on Lynch syndrome and knowing the information, what you do with the information. And we hear all kinds of stories of people who don't want to get tested, do want to get tested. So in many cases, it's very gray. Like Saf says, it's not really a black and white world. And understanding probability, which is one of the worst things that we do as humans, is very important. Because some people think 90% risk is awful. Some people think, well, I have 10% chance I'm not going to get this. So it's really a different way of looking at the same thing. So there's no simple answer to these questions. Any other comments?
I just wanted to say something with regards to the fact that you feel like a pincushion. I completely understand that. But, to follow up on what Rory said, also, you have to be your best own advocate. So you know your body best, and if you feel like what you're hearing is not the answer for you, get a second opinion, ask as many questions as you want. I kept a journal, I still keep a journal, even though I've been fired from all my oncologists at this point. But every appointment I had a list of questions, I wrote them down when I was thoughtful, as opposed to being freaked. And I wrote down all the answers. What we do in our group is, part of what we do for the patients that we deal with is a lot of them, their GPs have no understanding about stomach cancer. So, we have great relationships with the experts, so we offer that to them, and we say, you should go for a second opinion if you're not comfortable. Ask as many questions as you want, because that's the whole point. If we don't open that dialogue between patient and doctor, then you're always going to be at a disadvantage.
Many hospitals are moving to online access of medical records. So you can probably check most of the major cancer centers and other academic hospitals actually have patient access to their records. So you're welcome to look at your own records and read them and understand them and bring them to meetings or speak to people who are dictating letters or looking at data. It helps to avoid mistakes and helps you to understand some of the medical issues that you might get shortchanged with at a clinic visit. Any other comments? Yes. On the back, okay.
Hi there, I have a comment and two questions. My comment is that pre-screening works and coming to these talks can work as well, and I'm a living example of that. I knew I had Lynch syndrome when I came to one of these talks about 4 years ago, and Dr. Sarah Ferguson was speaking. She's a gynecological oncologist, and I went to speak with her after, made an appointment, and she sent me for a routine screening, and they found stage 1 ovarian cancer, which was followed by another ovarian cancer, and then endometrial cancer about a year after that. So, and I'm now, I went through hell, but I'm alive and relatively healthy now. So I'm really grateful for all you folks, and I just want to say that to people in the room. I know I sort of hesitated a bit to come to my first talk and to do any screening tests, but I'm very happy to be alive and here speaking today. My first question is around so my mother actually passed away at the age of 46 of stomach cancer, and so I am wondering about the data around the effectiveness of the gastroscopies.
So we know in Korea and Japan, where there's a high risk of stomach cancer, 10 times what we have, that there's more people who are diagnosed with early stomach cancer. And when you have stomach cancer and you're diagnosed with early stomach cancer, instead of the 25% at 5-year survival rate, your survival rate is like 94 to 98%. So we know that if you catch it early, you live longer. We don't have evidence in Lynch that getting screened with upper endoscopy, prevents it. Your risk is probably lower than your mother's, just because there's less stomach cancer in your generation and your mother's generation, by definition, in all populations around the world. But I do think it's reasonable to have a discussion with someone about whether having one scope. I think lots of people get scopes for pretty serious reasons. The hard question isn't to have one scope. I think having one scope is pretty reasonable. It's just whether or not we should follow. And I think if you had a family history and had any of those predisposing factors for stomach cancer, intestinal hemorrhage, chronic atrial vasculitis, and I think there's a reasonable case to be made that if it's okay to screen 10%, and probably not okay to screen 1% like in Canada, that somewhere in between, there are some people that should be followed. And even though we don't have evidence, one of the ways to get evidence is to follow how people do. And so we don't know yet the answer to that question, but I do think it's very, very reasonable, someone in your situation, to at least run an OGD. And after one OGD, have a discussion with someone like myself, with genetic counselors, to talk about, do you have to be followed?
Thank you.
Yes, over here.
Yes, this question back for Melissa. Were you on the panel about the aspirin question in regards to Melissa saying that, discuss aspirin with their GP, which I don't think is in the realm of their expertise. The studies on aspirin were high doses, which we don't use here, and there's, a lot of patients risk or low, but there's real risk of bleeding with aspirin, especially taking higher doses. I haven't read anything recently about recommendations, and just to come back, what are the recommendations based on some recent
Well, it's not black and white. I mean, it's all risk benefit.
for patients who are low risk bleeding patients?
Right.
Who are
You're
low
telling
risk
low
of
risk
aspirin, are you recommending aspirin, or are you recommending 81 or higher doses like 325s?
So, in case people don't know, there was a paper written by someone named Dr. John Burns, who lives in England. He did an aspirin study looking at patients with Lynch syndrome, and he gave them very high doses of aspirin, 600 milligrams. And after a very long period of time, I think it was 4 or 5 years, they started to see a reduction not just in colorectal cancer, but in all the Lynch syndrome cancers. And so there's now a study going on involving multi-centers around the world to now compare different doses. So look at small doses, like 80 milligrams, up to 600 milligrams, to see whether taking small dose aspirin can have the same reduction. There is some biological evidence, these are, that these would work. So we think there have been aspirin studies in nursing, big nursing population back when, and we know that those nurses had a reduction in colon polyps and colorectal cancer in the general population. So there seems to be some evidence that aspirin would reduce the risk. We don't have any evidence that 80 milligram baby aspirin would be beneficial in someone with Lynch syndrome, but when we asked John Burns about it, who's the guru of aspirin and Lynch, he said he recommends it to all his patients. It's becoming more common for people to say at least people should be considering it, but it's not a full recommendation because we can't do that without evidence. And what we tell people is if you are healthy enough, in other words, you don't have ulcers, you don't have risk of gastric bleeding, you're not planning to get pregnant, you're not young and at risk, you don't have other cancers or on treatment and so forth. If you're healthy and you can do it, then you might want to consider it. And people take baby aspirin for other reasons, like for prevention of heart disease and stroke and so forth. So it might be beneficial, we just don't have the full data yet. So we're cautiously telling people to speak to their doctor about their personal health of taking aspirin, but not necessarily, we don't expect their doctors maybe to know all the studies that we know. So there will be an answer to this, it's just not out yet.
I think Phil had a question.
Yeah, first just a comment, I've been to all these things, thank you to all the speakers, and thank you to Melissa and your crew, these things are great. And it's a lot of work. Secondly, Doc, I got 2 questions, and I'll hang up and take calls here. Dr. Tabori, so one of the themes is we've got to be our own best advocate. So am I getting this right? If we get any type of cancer, being Lynchers or whatever, like colon cancer, ear cancer, whatever, we should be saying, hey, you should know about my Lynch because of immunotherapy stuff, right? Was that it? And the other question, sorry, and I'll let you both answer. Dr. Gallagher, and you're at the table. Any predictions on the World Series? I'll let you guys answer in New York.
So maybe the first question to you guys, anybody is looking what's happening with the game? So always think about this.
I want the prediction before we get a score.
I think every time you need to do any kind of, either you unfortunately get cancer or anything, let your doctors or the team or yourself also be aware of the fact that you're Lynch, because it's not only about the new sexy drug that happens today, because in 5 years it may be something else. But as I showed before, the initial amazing stuff for us was to find that regardless of which type of cancer, the tumors that have a lot of mutations are actually not efficient. So even with the previous therapy, they're doing better. So the doctors are tailoring new treatments today based on that knowledge. And again, in 5 years we'll know more, isn't it? That's the beauty. And sometimes we need to accept actually for the previous question that we don't actually know. We will know in 5 years the results of the right dose of aspirin. but we have to jump to the water now. So you make the decision that's right for you, knowing that it's always unknown a little bit. But yes, please tell everybody when you get to it that you are Lynch.
Okay, right here in the middle. Oh, sorry, right.
First of all, thanks to all of you for organizing this and all of you for speaking. I have just a quick question for Teresa, which is you mentioned that there's an online support group. I was wondering if you could share the name of that group because I suspect quite a few of us might like to check that out.
Yes, it's a closed group, so you have to, kind of apply for membership.
How do you
Not
do
apply,
that?
you just go online, I think you can just ask to be a member.
But
And
what's the name of
it's
the
called Lynch Syndrome HNPCC.
Okay.
I can send it to Melissa and, but it is a closed group, so it's not a public group, but it is a closed group and it's online. There's, it's a Facebook group.
Okay.
And it's,
To learn to do Facebook.
it's great, and, you know, it's great for support because everybody's in the same boat. And there's people from all over the world that are part of it.
Yeah, it would be really helpful if we could get some.
Maybe we'll start a Lynch
Well, and that
support group here.
That was going to be my second question. Is there any,
There
like,
isn't.
we could turn up in person group here in the city at all for that? Is it something that's been contemplated or that would people be interested in?
So, sorry, should I just say that and then you speak? So we did actually do a research project with Dr. Mary Jane Esplin, who's also a psychologist, who ran a support group. I think she's not a psychologist, a nurse. Oh, she's a nurse, right. But she practiced in this area, and we did, I think, 2 or 3 support groups where I think it was 8 weeks. Some of the people here were in those support groups. And she brought in expert speakers, and she brought in a family member for one of them, and it was run with her and one of the genetic counselors. It was really successful, and then they didn't get any more funding to continue doing it. So we haven't, we have organized buddy systems, and some of you may have been asked to be part of it or done it, where someone new diagnosed with Lynch syndrome maybe wants to speak to someone who has either considered having hysterectomy, who's been young at diagnosis, who had to have their colon removed, and we've tried to match people up together, but we don't have an ongoing support group that we've done. We've talked about this too in the biallelics, which are, so if 2 people with Lynch syndrome, Marie didn't explain this because it doesn't want to scare you, but I feel like we keep referring to it, so we should just explain it. But if 2 people with Lynch syndrome marry and both pass on their mutation to their child will have a very severe syndrome that causes childhood cancers. That is what biallelic Lynch syndrome is. It's rare because it's unusual for 2 people with Lynch syndrome to meet and marry, unless perhaps you might be related to each other, or sometimes it does happen, you're not related. But in any case, that happens. We have many families, and we've talked about doing support groups for them as well. We just haven't quite, we've looked into it, but it's hard to find the way that the hospital will allow us to get them to talk online in the confidential way a hospital does that, because there are policies around sharing information. So we haven't quite figured out the clinical way to do it, and we haven't quite figured out the granting for the research, but Tay might be someone that we should speak to, because she is a psychologist working with our center, Tay. And we've looked into a lot of the psychological issues with Lynch. We haven't done it so much with the biallelics, but we should, and maybe we should talk to you guys. If you're interested in doing it, then we would be able to try and help facilitate.
I was going to say that ask Teresa, because her and another gastric cancer patient started the My Gut Feeling and approached us, and it's been completely patient and family driven, and it's amazing where they have gone within, I think it's 2 years? Not even 2 years, they knocked on our door and said, hey, we heard you're interested in stomach cancer, are you interested in speaking? And they have a Facebook group, a Twitter site, they have grown exponentially, and you know, in the perfect world, we would have enough money to give you guys all the counseling and support that you need, but I think if you find champions like Teresa, amazing things can happen in a very short period of time.
So I was just gonna say, I'm more than willing to reach out to anyone who has any questions and wants to start even one-on-one. I'm doing the support groups for stomach cancer, and in our group alone, which, I mean, we're national, but in our group alone, there's 3 or 4 people that have Lynch syndrome and stomach cancer. So, and we started it just because we felt, both Katie and I, who's my co-founder, felt that we went through this journey alone because most people who were diagnosed with well, she doesn't have Lynch, but with stomach cancer, there was nowhere to turn because usually people are diagnosed late, and really don't survive. But we were earlier stage diagnosis. But the same thing with Lynch. There's not a lot out there in terms of, and we do our support groups in person, and people dial in, and we have guest speakers and things like
And
that.
Facebook Live.
And sometimes Facebook Live if we can manage to get the technology right. And in fact, at the end of the month, we're actually holding our first conference because there was such an interest and a call for it. And it's about opening the dialogue between the medical community and the patient community. But we started because simply we felt that we didn't want anyone else to go through the journey alone because it is such a tough journey, even like with Lynch, because it's always there. It's just always in the back of your mind. And to be able to speak to someone about that, and this online group is quite good, you know, just anxiety, all that stuff. It's just great to be able to express it and someone on the other side saying, yeah, I completely understand because I go through the same thing.
Can I just challenge you for
Yeah, go
one
ahead.
thing? I'm sorry, because actually, we should actually look at, not parents, we do parents, but patient groups who succeeded. How did it happen? And it's never starting with the hospital and somebody was a psychologist that wanted to. They never have enough time and they don't also have the resources. It's always starting with groups like yours that they decide to do something. In this crowd here, you have leaders in education, you have leaders in funding abilities, you have leaders in so many things. If you establish that group, you'll see how exponentially you'll get everything, anything from organizing that, funding and everything, and then you'll see that you can use us, the psychologists and other people, and get them the resources to support you. It never goes from the institution to the people, but the most successful groups got amazing things. Some of the support group influence the NIH decision making. You can go that high.
Yes, in the middle there.
My question, a couple of questions.
Yep.
Is for Dr. Farrar. When you were presenting your data, I noticed that the incidence of stomach cancers increases markedly at post 50 years old. I was wondering if your probabilities for getting stomach cancer and Lynch factor in that previous generations often didn't live that long. They would have died of stomach cancer or bowel cancer perhaps before that. I know in my family, for instance, I know of 10 male ancestors who would have had Lynch and none of them made it past 55. So with modern medicine, Lynch people are now surviving much older, and are they just surviving to the point where now stomach cancer becomes more probable?
You know, it's a very, very, very insightful comment, and I think it's hard to know because as the rate of the population drops, we know that the stomach cancer and Lynch will drop. We know that. I mean, we see that in Family G, the 2 of the 10 family members died of stomach cancer, but lots of people died of stomach cancer in 1913. And the number I think is like 60% of people with Lynch, if they die of a cancer, will die of a non-endometrial, non-colorectal cancer. So that list of the other cancers, the ones that we are less common, are the ones, if you're gonna die of stomach cancer, more than half the time. So you're right, maybe by focusing on colorectal cancer surveillance and other strategies, more stomach cancers are gonna pop up in generations to come. I think that will be balanced off by the fact that even in South Korea and Japan, stomach cancer is less prominent than it was a generation ago and 2 generations ago. So I think they're going to be moving in opposite directions. So.
However, when you're bringing in overall populations in other countries and areas, isn't that more environmental?
It's environmental, it's diet, it's H. pylori, it's probably genetic. So we know in most countries, the stomach cancer rate and H. pylori seems to be growing. I mean, in stomach cancer rates are going down everywhere. And in Lynch syndromes, I mean, we don't have the numbers, but it seems like if you look at families 2 generations ago, the number of stomach cancers would have been higher. And, you know, if you look hard enough, you know, one stomach cancer seems like a lot, but if you do a big enough family tree, you might find out that 1 out of 20 people might have stomach cancer. And even though it's rare, that ends up being about the 5%. I mean, I was asked to see a patient, she had a polyp in her stomach, her mother died of stomach cancer, and then someone else had died of stomach cancer, and you finally did the tree, and there was actually a lot of family members who didn't have stomach cancer. So her risk in her family was somewhere like 8% of people died of stomach cancer, which is in that, you know, expected number, but the initial signals seem much higher. So it is very complicated. I don't think there's an easy answer, and it's not going to be ever like colorectal cancer where we have screening every 3 years starting at age X. So I'm happy to talk to you afterwards, but it's
Okay,
it's a
I
long.
also noticed in your final suggestion, regarding whether or not there's value to screening, a lot of it was based on the average overall Lynch carriers, but that there was obviously a higher risk in MSH2, and whether or not that recommendation still held for MSH2.
So I don't think we can say for sure, because you can have, I mean, these numbers are small, so you go to that Dutch-German study, 2 big registries, lots of patients, lots of families, and they had no MSH6. So you could easily say, MSH6, you don't get stomach cancer, and then you add 1 more registry, and all of a sudden, it's almost as high as MLH1. So the numbers are too small to make blanket statements. It does influence my decision. I have a patient whose brother had stomach cancer. He's a Lynch carrier. He had intestinal metaplasia on an OGD at another center. He has MSH2 mutation. I'm screening him every 2 to 3 years because he has enough of those risks. He's a male. He used to smoke. You know, I think for him there's value. So I think it adds up. It, you know, if you come to talk to me and we have a long discussion about the pros and cons of surveillance, it will be part of the calculation. There's just never going to be, I think, in stomach cancer and Lynch, black and white statements because this is too rare.
So if I can just add to that, in my personal case, I'm being monitored annually with both colonoscopy and endoscopy, just because I'm super high risk because I've had 2 cancers. So I'm monitored annually, and that was the decision of all my medical team.
So am I.
And I think it's dangerous. I mean, it's nice to see everybody talking about their stories, but I think you have to put it in context. It's tricky and dangerous to take anything from the person sitting beside you or even from Teresa and extrapolate to yourself. You really have to be careful with the information. And the other, you know, we struggle with epidemiology, which is the field of study of populations, and we don't have good epidemiology for Lynch because there just aren't enough patients to do statistics on. I will tell you one interesting statistic though that I don't know if you've talked about in previous years, but the relative risk of cancer in Lynch syndrome actually falls after 50 or 60. Now that's called a relative risk, which is a lot different than individual risk. So compared to the general population, as if the high risk that everybody's worried about kind of peaks in the 50s and 60s. It's not that you can't get colon cancer in your 70s with Lynch, but the relative risk actually falls, and the epidemiology data supports that. So that's another piece of information that may reassure you, may confuse you, but that's the problem, that's the challenge of listening to individual stories and trying to extrapolate it to yourself or your one of your family members. So just be careful.
If you have a family history of Lynch, if you're 2 or 6 or whatever the number is, does everybody have the same number?
Yes. Everybody in the family,
Will
blood
have-
relatives have the same number. Yes, back there.
What is the risk of frequent MRI screening? I've heard recently that the gallium can collect in the brain, but we don't have enough data to say whether that's worthy or not.
I don't know if any risk of MRI. I mean, radiologists will tell you there's no risk. Is that correct? Really, I mean, you do a lot of screening
So
with MRI.
there are all the time news stories that come and go. We need to be very, very careful. Yes, the latest story is that gadolinium is what they use in the
Yes.
brain may affect, but actually, you know, sometimes these stories are not real live patients that we follow for 20 years and see that nothing happened.
Yeah.
However, just for these screening MRIs, that for example, we do total body MRI, we use a technique that doesn't use contrast. So
Intravenous.
that may not be actually a problem. So if you
Yeah.
have any problems here, this is not probably one of them.
So you don't think the magnet, I mean, people talk about the magnet.
Oh, and that's another, you know, everybody, what about the cell phones and brain tumors? You know that story? There are so many stories. We have real problems here. I don't know, I'm saying that in a really important thing. The statistical chance of getting a brain tumor from radiation of the cell phone and or from, let's say, yearly MRI scans is so considerably less than the real other risks that we are talking, which we are struggling with, then I think take some of the worry out, some of the anxiety out, because we do have real examples.
Yeah.
Yes, in front. Yes, right here, I think.
Okay.
Do you want a microphone?
Well, if they can hear me. I
We
don't
can hear you,
need-
we can hear
Can you hear me? Then I don't need-
Okay.
Can I ask my second question?
Sure.
Sure.
I was just wondering if CRISPR can be used on individual organs.
That's it. I think that's one of the ideas, right?
Yeah, so that's probably where it's going to be used first, and it's probably going to be used in a very accessible organ, such as the lung, where you could inhale a vector. So, and also we could hypothesize that if we inject an accurate CRISPR vector into a tumor, that wherever that tumor is, whether it's the pancreas, stomach, colon, or endometrium, that we would try to correct some of the genetic changes that are driving that tumor. So that's probably its first use, so I believe so, yes.
Go ahead, back here.
Yes, my wife here said she has the Lynch syndrome. She was tested, a few years ago. Now we have 3 children, 2 are twin boys, and they all have the Lynch. Now one of my sons, a few months ago, was diagnosed with a polyp in the stomach, in the upper stomach, close to the esophagus, and it's either a polyp or a tumor, you could call it a tumor. And it was a pathology report was a T2, is it sound right? T2 stage for.
I mean, it would be hard to know on a polyp, like, a small polyp is unlikely to be a T2.
It was, about 7 millimeters. So anyway, he's gone through the first chemo session, and the team is leaning towards removing his stomach. So it's the protocol, they're following the protocol, chemo surgery and chemo. Now he has 2 children who are 7 years old. They're also twins. At what age should they be tested for Lynch? I know they might be a little young to be tested for that.
I think that we should defer to genetic counselors, and we probably would do a much very thorough discussion than putting these guys on the spot. I think.
No, I didn't
Unless
mean
they want to answer.
No, I didn't mean to put anyone on the spot. This is just
Yeah.
Just
a
to
question.
answer, Melissa's given me the green light to speak on her behalf. So generally, Lynch syndrome we consider an adult onset disease. So we generally do not test young children who are 7 years of age, because really we would like to give them the opportunity to make that decision for themselves, and it's not really going to make a difference in their health until they reach young adulthood. That being said, that there are some young, mature minors who understand the concepts of Lynch syndrome and the inheritance of Lynch syndrome when they are in their young teens. And if they are interested and show that they have medical capacity, meaning that they know the consequences of the test, understand what the test means and what a positive test and negative test is, we would see them to counsel them, and if the timing is right, they could have it as a mature minor. But in a 7-year-old, not just yet. It would be helpful for your son who is going through some cancer right now for an update if that he is concerned about his kids. So our door is always open for them. But usually it's around 18 years of age.
Thank you. Now, for someone with Lynch who might be a little paranoid, what other test? Because someone could be asking, am I going to get a brain tumor? Am I going to get, cancer in my liver, in my lungs? What tests are feasible or acceptable for someone who is a little paranoid that they might get cancer elsewhere?
So that we have to rely on the evidence. And the evidence, what we're still holding true to is the colonoscopies. And as Dr. Barr said, it depends on your personal family history and your personal history and whether or not we need to tailor that any further. So the person who is paranoid, we would want to look at their personal history, their personal health history, and their family history, whether or not there needs to be any further surveillance done. But these MRI scans and scanning of the body for other types of tumors that are deep-seated in the body, we don't currently have evidence that it makes a difference. And a lot of times we find things that we shouldn't investigate. The other thing is also be cognizant of your symptoms. Like, although you may feel like you are an elastic ball, if you are having severe abdominal pain and you have Lynch syndrome, that should prompt investigation. That is different than surveillance. Surveillance is on healthy people walking around. We do the colonoscopies and maybe a gastroscopy depending on your personal history and maybe some other endometrial investigations. But aside from that, there's not much. That's not for patients who have symptoms. If you have symptoms, you have a burning headache that doesn't go away, or if you have abdominal pain that's preventing you from having your activities of daily living, that promptly needs attention. That's a different story.
Thank you very much for having invited us and having sent us that letter, and for everyone involved in putting this together. We really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone.
I think that's a good way to close the formal session. Thank you. I'm going to ask the speakers if they don't mind hanging around if there's some personal burning questions, but remember they have their own timetables too. But if there's something that you really want to bring up, wasn't addressed, feel free to come up to the front. I'm going to thank Melissa, Kara, Laura, Arden, others, Salah, and all of our speakers, especially Teresa, for being so brave and share your stories. You see the Twitter account and also the questionnaires that were handed. You can fill them in, return them back to us and help us improve the next session or two. So good night and thanks very much.